Welcome back, everybody. I'm Phil. That's Sam.
Hey guys, welcome back to the channel.
Today, we've got a sponsored video from Anton. Anton wanted us to check out a recent event that happened, was the Ukraine attack on some Russian bombers, strategic bombers that happened not too long ago. By the time this video is up, it takes us some time to put it together and edit it and all that stuff and make sure there's no copyright related issues. So it'll be a couple of weeks after we've done this video and after the event actually has occurred while we get this up on the channel. So you never know. There might be something that happens in between us recording it. A response from Russia, because it was Ukraine that had attacked Russia in this instance here. So we don't know how things are going to play out, but this is a pretty renowned attack in terms of the damage that it did. So we're going to get into just how much, I think, on this video.
Yeah, and learn some more about it. And thank you, Anton, for supporting the channel. We appreciate it.
Yeah, we love to get educated, especially when it comes to stuff related to like military or conflict or whatever, because obviously we didn't grow up in that environment. So, you know, this is a cool way, I think, to dive into something a little more recent. When it comes to the war itself, like me, I wish there was no war going on at all. You know, I'm not like, you know, saying that support this country or that country or anything. I just don't want there to be a war at all. I know we have Russian subscribers, we have Ukrainian people that tune into the channel, and we just don't want to see anybody get hurt. And you know, ultimately, I really would love to see, you know, the war come to a close or a ceasefire or something, because diplomacy is the way to go, and that's how I feel about it. But this is strictly educational purposes that we're getting into here, and hopefully we can come to a resolution on the whole thing very, very soon.
Yep, totally agreed.
All
also, on a positive note, this guy looks like he's got a pretty sick setup.
What, with in the background here?
Yeah, he's got like all these pictures and all these like little figurines.
Well, we've never checked him out before, so let's get into it and see what this is all about.
Today, we're going to learn why these multi-million-dollar, irreplaceable Russian strategic bombers were left naked and exposed with no overhead protection, exactly how many aircraft were actually destroyed based on fancy new satellite and radar image evidence, how Ukrainian intelligence operatives pulled off this historic Ocean's 11-style attack, and how Russian forces might respond. I'm your average infantryman, Chris Cappy. I create weekly videos about war, weapon systems, and geopolitics, so let's jump right into it, you guys. Way back in December 2023, the Ukrainian military intelligence hatched a plan to target Russia's strategic bomber fleet, has been firing conventional missiles at their cities for years now. But there was a huge challenge standing in their way. These valuable aircraft take off from remote airfields located over 4,000 miles or 6,000 kilometers away, which is far outside the range of Ukraine's attack drones. So they came up with a solution. Take a look at this picture here that Ukrainian SBU agents released after the attack. It shows the location of the warehouse inside Russia where they stockpiled the drones and explosives. Russian FSB security agents have since geolocated it using open source markers. It was in Chelyabinsk, which is right near the border with Kazakhstan. This indicates to me that the drones were smuggled through the international border here, which would make sense because Kazakhstan has long been a smuggling route for products that the West have sanctioned since then and not allowed to go into Russia. You guys, this part is nuts. During the course of the 18-month-long Operation Spiderweb, Ukrainian SBU agents successfully smuggled across the border about 140 first-person view kamikaze drones. Now, as someone who's been smuggled across the border into Russian territory before, I can confirm this is not an easy feat. These undercover agents prepared special wooden boxes with dozens of drones under remote-controlled hatches that would blow open with a signal. They then placed shipment orders through an elaborate system of shell corporations and dummy contracts, which sent unwitting Russian civilian truck drivers right past target air bases on the same exact time on the same exact day. On the morning of June 1st, as the trucks stopped at gas stations, restaurants, or simply drove down the highway, they deployed swarms of hidden FPV drones. Some of the locals and truck drivers actually noticed what was happening. They climbed on top of the containers to try to stop the drones, but it was too late. The trap had already been sprung. One truck driver who was interviewed by Russian state media later, RIA Novosti, the publication, they said, quote, "They were in the back of the truck and we threw stones to keep them from flying up, to keep them pinned down," end quote. All the Russian truck drivers have since told similar stories of being booked by businessmen who requested they deliver the wooden cabins to different locations around Russia. Kids, you You know the lesson here, right? Watch out for strange businessmen asking you to drive near air bases. According to a Telegram channel with links to Russian...
That's really insane, the fact that it was like through some shell companies and just like a business that was set up that you're going to be doing some shipping,
like
and
covert
deliveries,
operations.
and it was driven by Russian drivers themselves.
Yeah, who had no idea.
And then it's just automated to take place. That's really, really wild. I mean,
That's scary.
so insane, the difference in the measures that are taken in 2025 to conduct an attack. I mean, on so many levels, this is crazy because it's inside Russia. You know, you're not required to have any manpower in Russia from a Ukraine standpoint, and it's being literally, you know, conducted by Russian drivers and, you know, shell companies. That's just wild to me. I had heard some details about how it happened, but nothing like this.
No,
So
super sneaky.
yeah, it's very, very sneaky.
Crazy.
State security services called Baza. Some of the drivers said they received further instructions of where exactly to park the trucks. As soon as they followed those directions, they were shocked to see drones flying out of them. I mean, I know hindsight is 2020 here, you guys, but it sounds like a real suspicious job to me. Privately booked to drive a weird wooden cabin to the middle of nowhere, Russia at a very specific time, date, and place. Or I don't know, maybe that's a normal Tuesday in
Probably
Russia. The
getting some
attack
extra
drones flew a
cash.
few kilometers to their targets, and video evidence shows them slamming into multiple Russian aircraft. This might be one of the most lower enlisted private things I've ever seen. I stumbled across this video of a Russian soldier doing a live stream, selfie-style self-report on the battle damage. War Thunder forums leaking information will never have anything on soldiers looking for clout. The Ukrainian drone operators had direct control over the FPV drones, it appears like, once they were deployed. National security author Dmitry Apevryelch said on X that he believes that they used Russia's own 4G LTE mobile cell network to pilot these drones. Can you hear me now? And it could have been done from outside Russia. This was a weakness in their air defense they exploited because Russian Air Force probably didn't want to jam the entire cell network for the whole civilians living in that area of those air bases. So Ukraine successfully hit 4 air bases, and they targeted a 5th even further east in Amur Oblast that borders China.
Wow.
But that truck caught fire before reaching the deployment zone. It's like my old squad leader used to always say, ain't no warfare like partisan warfare. Once the Trojan trucks...
So I saw a video about that there. He didn't really touch on it in too much detail, but I thought that 5th one that they were talking about...
blew up.
That just blew up.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure the guy pulled over the truck or they pulled it over or something, and he went to go inside it and it blew up. So it was like there's a self-destruct mechanism.
If somebody tries
If
to go
Trump
in there.
tried to go inside it.
Oh my gosh.
So it wasn't just that it caught on fire.
Yeah. It
That's
was like,
what I
no, he
heard.
went to go see what was in there in the back and it
Yeah.
exploded. Oh my God.
they're being called, were on their way. The Ukrainian agents safely slipped out of Russian territory before all chaos was about to be unleashed. Let's do some of what's called BDA in the military, or battle damage assessment, because I've heard a wild range of how many aircraft were actually hit. You got Russia saying, oh, barely any. You got Ukraine saying, oh, tons of them. So what is the actual truth?
I think I heard
Thanks to
40.
satellite and radar being accessible by civilians and jamooks like myself, we can actually confirm a lot of what happened now that the dust has settled a few days later. The Times dropped a couple of $1,000 to get access to these radar images and confirmed 7 Russian strategic bombers appear to be destroyed at the Bela airbase, and the Olenia had 5 confirmed hits from the video footage released. I apologize if I'm pronouncing these names incorrectly. I am not a Slav. Russian mill bloggers themselves claim the losses are less at 12 strategic bombers and 1 other aircraft, likely a giant transport. So Ukrainian intelligence, SBU, and the government in Ukraine reported that up to 41 bombers had been destroyed. Then on the afternoon of June 4th, the Ukrainian government released video evidence, proof of the drones striking 24 aircraft strategic bombers, 2 of which were the very valuable A-50 radar aircraft that cost about $300 million a pop, blinding
insane.
one of the Russian armed forces' best eyes in the sky. The Soviets only built around 40 of them, of which 6 were operational in the Russian fleet as of March 2025, which means that now they're down to 4. This is a very critical asset for them for finding targets and also protecting their other aircraft. The reason Russia puts vehicle tires, rubber tires on top of the bombers like you see there, it's their attempt to try to fool artificial intelligence systems that rely on image matching, and they want to fool them into thinking that's not an aircraft that they're looking at. So if a missile or an AI-driven drone has its camera look over there, then it might not think that it's an aircraft. I guess that explains why I've been seeing so many image capture tests that look like this recently. Since the Russian defense industry can't produce these aircraft anymore due to the production lines being
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's the best defense system for a $300 million plane.
Literally, like, let's just cover it in tires and hope it doesn't pick it up.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty wild. $300 million. I mean, you have somebody's bank account with a lot less money than that has a little more protection. So I don't know the full story. Maybe we'll get it as to, why they elected to do that. Maybe they just thought it was unlikely that they would be attacked inside Russia, right? Because, they would have their air defense systems come in play and never thought that it would come to this. But that's pretty wild. Tires. And I guess that's more for location tracking, right? It's not for protection. It's just that.
Yeah.
shut down decades ago. These are some actually irreplaceable aircraft. This allegedly has cost the Russian military somewhere between $2 and $7 billion worth of damage.
Damn.
Ukrainian government claims they're going to release more video evidence of strikes on strategic bombers, but we don't know if it's going to add up from the 24 up to the 41 that they claim they've hit. The big question that jumped out to me was, why were these Russian bombers left seemingly unprotected without even a net or any kind of overhead protection? Can't someone build a warehouse or a tarp around these things? I mean, can't we be bothered to just put a net over them? There are several reasons for this. One of them possibly has to do with an arms control treaty, the strategic arms reduction treaties between the United States and the USSR. In particular, START 1 from the good old year of 1991. It's a successor to the New START Treaty from 2010, and those treaties required some level of transparency of strategic nuclear delivery systems. If I can count your bombers from space, I know you're not hiding extras or prepping for a surprise first strike, which meant heavy bombers were required to be visible by satellite reconnaissance and stationed in open view when not actively flying. No hangars or hardened shelters were allowed for this asset. You see, America does the same thing. That's why their B-2 bombers are on full display for satellite imagery at Diego Garcia Air Base. And it reduced risk of accidental nuclear war. However, fast forward, and it also means that they're vulnerable to drone attacks. Now, you might point out that Russia has suspended their participation in the New START Treaty in February 2023, so they aren't bound to it anymore. And the US is no longer bound to it either. But there's also the feeling that geography was a protection all of its own, and that these remote locations are safe from attack. Over the past 3 years, Russia has moved some of these bombers away from air bases near Ukraine's border in an attempt to avoid exactly this kind of sabotage from happening. So there didn't seem to be a huge incentive to start covering up bombers with giant construction projects if it didn't seem necessary. But apparently, in hindsight, it was necessary. Even if it's only 10 strategic bombers, that would amount to a devastating loss. And you might say, well, they only lost a dozen bombers, they still have like 60 or so more. But that's not exactly an accurate way of thinking about it, because oftentimes you need your bombers resting, refitting, and being repaired. These assets are on what's called a rotational readiness model. So availability is never 100%. So usually a third of the fleet can be expected to be active, then another third is going to be in refit, another 20% might be just temporarily grounded for deep refit. It's a strategic loss because Russia lost their ability to address a multi-front war as easily. The air leg of their nuclear triad might not have been completely broken, but it may have been destabilized. So why are these bombers so important? Quickly, I think I need to put into context for us all the gravity of what just happened. Only 3 countries on planet Earth operate a long-range strategic bomber fleet: the United States, China, and Russia. These are the most expensive and powerful weapons and the means to deliver them that humanity has ever produced. Ukraine targeted Russia's Tu-95, Tu-22M3 bombers, the primary strategic strike platforms for both nuclear and conventional cruise missiles. They can fire nuclear weapons 5,000 kilometers after flying a max range of 15,000 kilometers. That's what makes them so special. These bombers have been used in the past by Russia to conduct attacks inside Syria, which at one point did help them turn the tide of that war. These bombers are often seen on show-of-force runs throughout the Arctic region. They often harass American pilots near Guam, Alaska, and near the border of NATO countries around the Baltic. You've probably seen footage of their fighter jet escort pilots buzzing American pilots. They conduct these kind of probing missions with the strategic asset of these bombers. It's the tools with which great powers prod at one another, and now Russia's ability to prod at one another or project power.
So clearly they're an important part of the Russian military. And, you know, on the one hand, you see why they were targeted. On the other hand, you see why, you know, Russia was doing some maneuvering to ensure that they wouldn't be as at risk as much.
Yeah.
I think like the response here is going to be a pretty big deal because on the one hand, Ukraine may have shown that they have the ability with tactical awareness to get a leg up and, you know, target specific assets that are really important, like I just mentioned. And maybe that will deter Russia from continuing on and thinking, you know, it's not worth losing another, you know, how many $5 billion of military. Although, you know, that money seems to come from taxpayer individuals anyway.
It seems like it's a drop in the bucket for them.
But with that said, maybe it acts as a deterrent and, you know, Russia says, okay, all right, maybe it's not worthwhile continuing on with this. The other side of it is it could be, number one, embarrassing for Russia to have this happen and they feel the need to respond. And I feel like that's likely
Like the pressure.
because, you know, they are looked upon as a, you know, big power in the world, as he just referred to. There's not many countries that have the capabilities that they have. So does that incentivize them more to, you know, escalate their own strikes by looking at it and saying, okay, well, you guys did this inside our country, so now we're going to do whatever. And on top of that, is it more of an issue now because that treaty, the START treaty that they talked about, where it was signed into an agreement that, okay, we're going to show our hand for our nuclear capabilities so that we're not starting a nuclear war. Now they have every incentive to hide their nuclear capabilities, which is going to become problematic. And that's essentially why the Cold War became what it was, right? It was just kind of a nuclear arms race and nobody knew what was going on. And we thought that
everybody was in the dark.
Yeah, we thought there could be an escalation at any moment. And that's kind of where we're trending back to with potentially something like this. So, you know, I'm hopeful that it's not the latter of what I just talked about, but I mean, maybe he's going to mention something about what their response might be. Yeah. But, you know, obviously from the standpoint of if you're at war and in, you know, Ukraine's position, you know, they have to be creative with their tactics because they maybe don't have the capabilities.
And they're not like a large power center.
Yeah, that Russia has, although they get obviously a lot of funding for, you know, what's going on. So I don't know. I mean, my biggest concern, like I said, is an escalation, and I want de-escalation. So although on the surface it looks like a very strategic move, and obviously it was very successful, and I do like the fact that it targeted more. It didn't target people or anything like that. It targeted obviously money and equipment. And the capabilities.
Yeah, like it wasn't like targeting to try to hurt people.
Yeah, so I think that was prudent on their part for sure. But I do worry there's going to be an escalation as well. So I guess we'll have to see.
Yeah, I would agree that is likely.
Yeah. All right, let's find out what he's going to finish with here.
Has been severely damaged. What will the Russian government and military response be? Russian state media has so far reported that the U.S. wasn't involved in planning of the attack. Big sigh of relief that they're saying that. This would certainly be reason for concern for us if they were saying otherwise, or at least officially. So far from what I've seen, the official Russian government response has been an attempt to minimize the attack. However, if we look at the Russian mill blogger community, which is very influential in Russia, they have been furious, with a lot of them famously calling it Russia's Pearl Harbor. A Russian war blogger, Roman Alkin, wrote on Telegram, "We hope that the response will be the same as the US response to the attack on their Pearl Harbor, or even tougher." What even? The historical analogy is pretty weak here in my opinion. Whether you are for Russia or against Russia, I mean, Pearl Harbor was a surprise attack by Japan before a formal declaration of war. Not to litigate this point too much, but at the very least, these two countries have been going at war for years now. This is nothing like Pearl Harbor. Russia has it in their nuclear doctrine that if their strategic delivery systems are attacked, they might reach that threshold for a nuclear retaliation. It's a possibility. However, it's unclear if this attack would invoke that kind of response, and it seems unlikely due to the fact that it would incur the wrath of many other countries. Former Ukrainian officer and open source analyst Tatarigami said, quote, "Notably, Ukrainian strikes appear to have deliberately avoided the more modern and nuclear-capable Tu-160 bombers, instead targeting the Tu-95 and Tu-22M3 platforms. We believe this selectively was a deliberate decision to avoid escalations by targeting key elements of Russia's nuclear triad, while still degrading assets actively involved in conventional strikes. There were even early reports that a Russian nuclear subbase near Murmansk was hit, although it now appears like later on it turned out that maybe those reports were false. But this shows just how much panic and confusion has been spreading throughout Russia. It reminds me of the beeper attack that the Mossad conducted against Hezbollah agents, and it reminds me of the threat analysis reports that I've read recently about how civilian container ships on floating water could be turned into hidden drone or missile silos against American bases by China or Iran.
Right.
I thought all of this is an emerging type of warfare that I would call remote hybrid sabotage. So this attack has changed how we will think about warfare, I think. It will change how we in America will seek to protect our vulnerable strategic bombers. It'll change how we think about rear bases that we took for granted were safe and sound. I mean, on the real, if you drive a truck in America, forget about stopping anywhere near air bases without getting pulled over now. It's one of those events that will be studied in military history years from now. And obvious lesson to me is that point defense is necessary everywhere now. If you want to see all sources and show notes for this episode, to follow along with the research, just go to cappyarmy.com. If you're like me, you're thinking Russian soldiers should have had better counter-drone weapons. The U.S. Army's thinking the same exact thing. Check out the last video I made about the U.S. Army's new 30mm airburst grenade gun. I'm your average infantryman, Chris Cappy,
And that was how many strategic bombers were destroyed, and our cat is destroying something around us. So if you saw us distracted at any point during the video, that's what's been going on. We've been having our own little drone attacks happening right here in front of us. But that was definitely informative, really gave us the details. And I think, totally agree with his statement there at the end that this will likely change how the perspective warfare that is to come and how that defense needs to play out. And I think this is probably
sneaky people can be. How sneaky people can be with their drones.
It's probably just a drop in the bucket, though, as well, because of the technological capabilities. If you really want to get creative, there are so many different things that you could be using nowadays with the use of the internet and everything.
I was also just thinking when he showed that picture with the tweet and then said that it was false, like even like people scaring people by fake reports using AI.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like you can use that as propaganda, right?
So it's a whole different ball game nowadays. So we'll see what the results are from this. And nonetheless, I think like we said, it's going to change, how things play out in the future. Hopefully for the better. Hopefully people will realize, damn, there's a lot of things that can go wrong nowadays. Let's cool it down.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
Yeah, I would love to see that come to a close and maybe the world gets back on a better path sooner rather than later. But you guys can give us more insights down below if you have any to add or any suggestions of things for us to check out. Anything else you want to add, Sam?
No, I thought that was very informative. So thank you for the request.
All right, guys. Thank you so much. Have a great day. We'll see you soon.